This is the lecture for European history for Tuesday, the 16th of March, 2021. Where we left things yesterday was we were talking about the developments in trench warfare. I talked about the characteristics of the trenches. By the way, you and back, if you feel cold, close the windows. Just please leave the fan on. I talked about the characteristics of the trenches themselves, how they were built and designed, differences between Allied and Central Powers trenches. I also talked about the key moments in trench warfare, which include the Battle of Verdun, which was the German attempt to lead France's army white by attacking a position that they would not let go, but how both armies ended up getting bled white at the Battle of Verdun. I talked to you about the British battle at the Somme, where human wave attacks caused over 60,000 casualties in a single morning. That's more casualties in one morning than we lost in 10 years of war in Vietnam, 3 years of war in Korea, and it's 5 times, actually 6 times as many people or more that we've lost in 20 years of the war on terror.
That's also greater than the population of Portland.
Yes, which is in the mid-50s as of 2010. I have no idea what the population of Coeur d'Alene is that now. I haven't seen the 2020 census figures yet. I should. I'm curious to see how much this area has grown. Yeah, but it's a lot of people. So battles, those are both 1916 battles. They were inconclusive. I told you about the French army mutinies in 1917, when the French army, after Verdun, had been promised by their new leadership that they had a better battle plan. And also that if the new battle plan didn't work, that the attacks would be stopped when it was reasonable to stop. And then in 1917, French General Nivelle, who came up with all of these ideas, did not have a better battle plan, and in fact did not stop the attack. As a result, the French army mutinied and was broken for a good long time. Now, the French high command killed as many mutineers as they could find, which brought order back. But order is different from an army capable and willing to fight an aggressive battle. This is a sign of stress. Now, for reasons I will explain later, in 1917, the Tsar's government in Russia falls, and a republic is established. The Russian Republic tries to fight the war, but for reasons I will describe later, having to do with the Bolshevik Revolution, they fail. And in November 1917, October old calendar, the communists take over Russia, and the first thing they do is try to make peace with Germany, and ultimately they make peace. A very advantageous peace for the Germans. And millions of German soldiers who had been fighting deep into Russia don't have to be there anymore because the Bolsheviks have agreed that the Germans get to keep all that territory. And so these millions of men are now on their way to the Western Front. They get there by the spring of 1918. And this St. Michael's Offensive, also known as the Emperor's Battle, Kaiserschlag, is Germany's real attempt to take advantage of the situation. They believe that by shifting armies from the eastern to the western fronts, they will outnumber the French and British before significant numbers of Americans arrive. America joined the war in 1917, but we didn't really have an army capable of fighting a world war. Our army was significantly smaller than the British when the war started. So it was taking time for American troops to be drafted and trained and sent to Europe. So this is a gamble on the part of the Germans. Now, air power hadn't broken through the trench defenses of either side. Digging mines and exploding from below, while it had local effects, didn't change things fundamentally. The trench line seemed incapable of being pierced by either side. The defense in war had become so powerful that the offense, which everyone believed in at the beginning of the war, was revealed to be a fool's plan. Attack in an age of machine guns was suicide. So what to do? Well, the British developed the land warship, or the tank, as the code name is, and the code name, for whatever reason, sticks. So we still call armored vehicles tanks. Um, at Cambrai, the tanks actually succeed in breaking through momentarily the German lines. But the British don't expect it. They expect that, like every other attack, it's going to just take some ground. And by the time the British realize what's going on, the British tanks have broken down or run out of fuel, and the Germans have established a new line beyond where the tanks are. By 1918, the British have improved their tanks, and they have lots more of them. The French have also added a light tank, the Renault, which looks sort of like a tracked Dalek from Doctor Who, Eastroid. And so the Allies have a good heavy tank in the British Mark V, and the good light tank in the form of the Renault. And the Germans, the French have some heavy tanks that are lousy. The Germans developed the A7B Panzer. I forget it. It's an armored war wagon. Is what it's called, and it's terrible. It's underpowered. Its guns are not well designed. It takes too many men to run. It's a calamity. So the British have tanks, and that's going to be useful when the American men arrive, and so we can have armored warfare in 1918, or especially 1919, when the Great Attack is planned. But first, we've got to get through, we, the Allies, have got to get through the German attack in the St. Michael offensive in the spring of 1918, with all these extra men. And the Germans have their own special breakthrough plan. It's called the Stormtroopers. You get the best, most aggressive, most physically and mentally healthy men from all of your army. Put them in a few elite units. Unlike Imperial Stormtroopers, these guys can shoot, they can fight, they're really, really tough. And you combine Stormtroopers, who have the world's first functioning submachine guns in large-scale use on a battlefield in 1917. Basically a gun that burps out pistol rounds like a little portable machine gun. And they have uniforms with big pockets for lots of grenades, and they are trained in storm tactics. Storm tactics is attack, attack, attack. And what's going to make this possible is the rolling barrage of artillery. Up until this point, both sides would just pound the enemy area and turn it into a moonscape, and then they'd stop, and the whistles would blow, and the attack would happen. And this would always give the enemy on the other side that had been able to survive this bombardment by being underground in dugouts, an opportunity to take their positions in the trenches and start shooting before the troops get there. Well, the Germans are going to perfect the rolling barrage. Basically, have your artillery landing like a heavy rainstorm between 80 and 120 yards in front of the troops. And at a prearranged moment, everything moves forward at a measured pace. The stormtroopers are trained to advance at that pace. The artillery is trained to advance their targets at that pace. And in theory, what happens is nobody's expecting this because it's very hard to do. It is so easy in real war to actually accidentally shell your own guys, and it's also so easy for your guys to lose track of things because of adrenaline and to charge too quickly. But the Germans pull it off. And as a result, in the St. Michael offensive, the Germans break through the Allied lines. The stormtrooper tactics and the rolling barrage work. So what happens? Well, the Germans are actually ready for this. And they exploit a breakthrough near the French town of Amiens, near the Belgian border. So the Germans are pouring through. The Allies are panicking. Up until this point, the French army and the British army and the new American army cooperated with one another. But they didn't have a unified command structure. That would change. General Pershing, the American commander, the same Pershing that had his troops dip their bullets in pig blood, to break the back of the Filipino Moro resistance on Mindanao. The same General Pershing that was given command of an American army sent into Mexico in 1916 when Francisco Pancho Villa, a Mexican revolutionary leader, attacked the American town of Columbus, New Mexico. He actually had an American film crew with him. The American film crew didn't think the real attack looked enough attacking, and it didn't play well on screen. So the American film crew got this Mexican warlord to attack the town again when the cameras were in position. You can't make this stuff up. So President Wilson sent General Pershing into Mexico to chastise Villa, but Villa just disappeared into the countryside. We marched around for a few months, and it was inconclusive, and then we got involved in World War I. So General Pershing agrees to let American troops be sent as reserves into British and French units. That's a big concession, because what everyone in this country is afraid of is that the French and British will just use American troops as cannon fodder. Well, Pershing agrees for the duration of the crisis to allow American troops to plug any gaps that they can. After that, the American Army is going to fight as a distinct unit. However, the British and the French and the Americans agree to unified command, and Marshal Foch is given command, a French general, of the entire force. Why? Because the war is being conducted in France, and because the French still have the largest army on the Western Front in terms of numbers. So the Germans are pouring through near the northern part of the trenches in Amiens, and it looks like they may actually succeed in their plan. However, throughout the entire war, there has been a blockade by the Royal Navy of all resources from the wider world to go into Germany. This blockade has caused German economic production and food production, noses guys, to go into crisis mode. For example, in 1916, the Germans, who love pork and various pig products, conclude that the grain that pigs eat would be better used for people. So they order a mass slaughter of all the pigs in Germany. For 2 or 3 months, everyone's eating sausage. And then after that, people are eating diets that are less and less and less protein rich. German bread is becoming more and more sawdust, less and less flour. You can use a lot of sawdust in bread and get away with it as long as you don't care about the nutrition. And the Germans are using more of that. The German people, for the last few years, have been slowly starving. In fact, it is this that's going to cause the war to end, ultimately with food riots in Austria and in Germany, all over the place, because people are starving and they know it. And it's happening so slowly that it's hell. So what do you think German troops are going to do when they get through the front lines and see the supply depots that the British, French, and the Americans have? For the first time in years, the Germans see plenitudes of meat. For the first time in years, the Germans see cigarettes, which a lot of guys smoked, and tobacco, and that isn't, utter garbage. For the first time in years, the Germans see cheese and wine and beer. And what happens is, after the attack breaks through, and before the Allies can get control of the situation, many German troops just stop at these Allied supply depots and start stuffing their faces. Their officers and sergeants try getting them moving, but they're not having any of it. These are guys who have been fighting a war, which is an active aerobic exercise, and they've got the best rations in Germany, but they've still been starving like everyone else. Now they have food, so the German army actually grinds to a halt near Amiens because they can't control their men who are gorging themselves on Allied food supplies. At this point, the tempo in the battle changes. The Americans are there in larger numbers than the Germans expect, and with British and French forces, including lots of tanks, the German lines are being, the German breakthrough is being contained and then pushed back. The Kaiserschlacht, the St. Michael's offensive, fails. Now, I'm going to tell you a lot about other aspects of World War I, but we're focusing on the trenches first and foremost. So I'm going a little bit ahead. With the failure of the St. Michael offensive, something breaks inside of Germany. In the summer of 1918, food riots erupt all over the country, and also in Austria. Revolution is in the air. After all, at this point, the communists in Russia all expect Germany to have the revolution, and for Germany to become the center of the global proletarian movement. And there's a strong German KPD, Communist Party Deutschland. German spelled communist with a K. So there's revolution in the air. People are talking about overthrowing the Kaiser, overthrowing the bourgeoisie, establishing a communist utopia, or at least a dictatorship of the proletariat. The Communist Party in Germany is organizing Spartacist bands. These are groups of people named after Spartacus who are getting ready to fight a revolution. The German Navy is ordered to go out and face the British again, and it would have been a suicide mission, and the Navy rebels. The Kaiser's beautiful battleships have crews on them that refuse to fight, and in some cases officers are murdered. So the country is beginning to fall apart, and at this point the Americans really arrive in the summer of 1918. And with the French and British, the Americans launch the Meuse-Argonne offensive, which is the biggest American offensive of the war, and we break through the German lines. Actually, we destroy the German lines. It's not even a matter of breakthrough. The German lines disintegrate under intense attack. This goes on into the autumn as the advance moves away from where the trenches were towards the German border. In early October, Generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff, who've been running the German war effort, say that there is a black day of the German army, when the German army loses so many men and is not willing to attack or counterattack. Basically, they act like a beaten force. A few weeks later, the Kaiser abdicates and flees to Holland, the only neutral country in the area, and the Germans sue for peace. The trenches are, in the West, the important thing. Now I'm going to tell you about the rest of the war, but in the end, American manpower, and it's not just the numbers of Americans coming in. The big, aggressive European guys were killed off in the first few years of the war. World War I selected the best and the most brave men on an entire continent and selected them to be murdered before they had a chance to reproduce. So the character of Europe changes as a result of World War I. And that character had been of the dominant civilization on the planet that had conquered the world, that was building empires, that was civilizing the savage, that was carrying Kipling's white man's burden. But all of those guys, or the vast majority of those guys, in France, in Britain, in Germany, in Russia, in Austria-Hungary, and all of Eastern Europe, they're the guys that'll take risks in battle. They're the guys that will lead in battle. They're the guys that will die in vast numbers in battle. What's left of the survivors? Men who don't necessarily feel the need to take risks, or to dominate the world, or to prove their manhood in battle, or any of that stuff. So the very nature of Western civilization is going to change strictly and solely as a result of the death of all of that one type of men on such a large scale. And it really isn't until now that Europe is beginning to show signs of that kind of person. But even now, it's a faint echo of what it was in 1914. So, let's look at some other areas. And we are going to come back to the trenches in the form of trench poetry. In fact, we're going to do the trench poetry now, because thematically that's the best place to do it. So if you look in your notepad, you will see on the last few pages, just after the maps, a series of poems from 1914 up through just after the war, and there's also a set of, there's a worksheet on the very last page. Poetry doesn't play much of a part in our world today. And there are reasons for this. Before World War I and during World War I, poetry was a part of the everyday life, not just of hoity-toity people, but of all people. So was music. Most middle-class homes had a piano that people gathered around, and they would sing songs together and invite neighbors over and make music. And sometimes after dinner, they'd sit around over drinks and they would read poetry to one another. What ends this is the radio, and to a lesser degree the newspaper, but particularly the radio. A lot of the sort of verbal interactive things that families and communities did before World War I were to come together and exchange ideas and talk and listen and express and feel and all of that stuff. And music and poetry, though not the same thing, are closely related, and you know it. Most song lyrics are poetical. And the thing about poetry that distinguishes it from every other form of written expression or verbal expression is that poetry is not about conveying conscious ideas as much as it is about conveying the inexpressible. So there's a challenge in poetry. How can you express the inexpressible? How can you use mere words to allude to or infer or imply or in some way capture that which cannot be captured in words? So through forms like iambic pentameter or even free verse, what the poet is trying to do is to use words to short circuit the normal rules of words, to short circuit the way that prose works. Prose, whether it's in the form of fiction or nonfiction, is a very direct way of expressing oneself. My lectures and all speeches are in many ways a direct form of expression. I am telling you what I want you to know. I am expressing it in a fairly straightforward manner. Poetry is not like that. Poetry can be more expressive and more direct than anything I have ever said to you. So a good poet, and there are so many different types of good poets and good poetry, but a good poet is going to be able to use words in a fashion that may capture the light, that may capture the spark, that may express the inexpressible or evoke that which cannot normally easily be evoked in words. And it's not just intellectuals that have a hunger for this stuff. It's like art. We have pop culture. And that is, people are called consumers of mass culture as if it's cheeseburgers. It's not. Human beings have an innate need to feel meaning. That's why we have religion. That's why we have drama and theater. That's why we have music, and that's why we have poetry and art. We have an innate need to feel, to express, to appreciate, to connect. And all of these forms can do that. But after the development of radio, more and more families become passive listeners to the prepackaged program on their set. Television intensifies this phenomenon. Today, people grudgingly learn about poetry in school, but most people will never, ever have anything to do with it again, except indirectly through the medium of music. It's one of the great downsides of our wonderful popular culture. With so much out there to partake in, people don't have the same need for their own imaginations. People don't have the same need to make art. How many people, ask the adults in your world, paint or write poetry or draw or make music or do anything artistic? A lot of the adults in your world may say, I mean, you may be lucky, you may have a family of people that do stuff like that. But a lot of adults give up making art as they appreciate how difficult it is to earn a living, especially if you have a family. There just isn't the excess energy. Well, back before there was radio or television or computer games or all these various ways that we can interact with a broader culture that provides us with products that we can consume, people have to do it themselves. World War I is the last great poetical war, in that everyday people who experienced the war directly as soldiers or as medics or indirectly as people sending their men off to war, women looking at the faces of the men and seeing how their worlds were changing, people wrote it themselves. They felt the need to put things into words to express the inexpressible. So what we have here is a series of poems that deal with all of this in a culture where poetry is not dead. So let's see, we have for 1914 two poems. For 1915, two more poems, that's four. For 1916, two more poems, that's six. For 1917, two more poems, that's eight. For 1918, two more poems, that's 10. And for 1919 and after, two more poems, that's 12. What I'm going to do is invite you to form 12 groups. You can work alone if you want, you can work with a partner if you want. We have exactly 12 people, so I guess what you can do is either, I'll let the class decide this. You can either work alone on your own poem, read the others, but you're going to be presenting on your poem. You're going to be reading it, and you're going to be talking about it in front of the class. This is one of the few presentation projects I'm keeping for this year. So each of you will be up here with the podium, and you'll be reading and talking about your poem. Or you can team up into pairs, and your pair can pick a year, and you can, among your teammates, divide up the work. So, does anyone wish to speak for either option? Either the solo option or for the working in teams of pairs working on year by year? Yeah.
What is it?
I can't hear you.
Can we do groups?
Why?
I like groups.
Okay. See, what I'm asking you to do is to try to persuade your classmates. So, do you want to say anything else? I mean, you like working in groups. That's fine. I personally hate working with groups, but that's just a difference between us. And since I don't have to do this in group form, I don't care. So okay, you're advocating for groups, yes?
I think if we do pairs, we might be able to get a deeper understanding for it because we can have a conversation about it.
Okay.
If we're doing the same year.
I was gonna say in pairs, I think that you're able to sort of get a different point of view and see how other people are interpreting it so that it's overall a more complete interpretation.
There are arguments to be said, to be made for interaction helping you think. Yes?
It altogether has the same amount of work. It's just whether communication is.
Yeah. So, do you have an opinion?
different.
Okay.
So, I personally prefer solo, but I will say in pairs, I feel like strictly we will have a longer presentation, as we will have more to say, because there will be two people talking.
Okay. So at this point, raise your hand if you want to do solo. 1. Yes or no?
Sure.
2.
Yes.
3. If we get a fourth person, we can let you all work independently, and then other people 4. Okay. You 4 are going to work independently. Everyone else form pairs. If you're working independently, I want you in the same part of the room, though. So I'm going to ask you to shift your seating. Independent people, you're going to be over here. Grouped people, you're going to be sitting with your partner somewhere in this part of the room. And I want to know where your groups are. And what I'm going to do is let you roll. And whoever rolls best is going to get to pick first. You do the whole year. You do the whole year.
So I think we don't. Well, I guess we get to.
No, I'm going to be rolling the dice, and then people are going to be determining. Casey.
So I was kind of unsure whether to sign it or not, but I think I would agree.
I maybe
Okay,
19.
go on over there. You
So,
can sit in the corner by the fire.
Or 1980.
Yeah, and then we both.
So we're doing 1980.
Ah! For the dice! Okay.
So
I knew I'd figure it out. Okay.
maybe 1980.
You at home are going to also do one of these poems. I will let you pick one. But in addition to the specialized poem that you're going to be working on, you also are going to have to do and understand all the poems, because the worksheet that's on the last page is going to be due the day after all the presentations are done. The presentations are going to be done tomorrow. So the worksheet with the poetry is due Thursday. So you're going to have your own poem to present about, but you'll have to learn about the others and then write answers on the overall poetry stuff. Hope you understand that. If you at home don't, you could rewind that section. Does anyone here not understand? So you're doing your own specialized poems, either in pairs or alone, and you are also going to listen to other presentations and answer the worksheet on that. So, group 1, group 2, group 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 13 and above is a re-roll. Hey, a different guy. Would you like to roll?
Sure.
Thank you. 2. So, okay, your group is going to choose first, and we're just going to go around the room. First, second, third. So Lee, you get whatever's left over. Okay, what year do you want to do?
1915.
Okay, so, boy, it would be nice to have a pen. We've got Miss Woodworth and Miss Birmingham on 1915. Okay, let me write this down. So, 1. Wrong place. 1. Woodworth. Birmingham. Now, how you divide up responsibilities for presentation is up to you, but I expect everyone to say something. Group 2.
1918.
1918. Okay. So we have for 1918, period 1. Just going to bring this up. We got Miss Darkholes and Miss Hepworth. 1. Darkholes. Hepworth. Okay. Group 3.
1914.
1914. Okay. And we've got Mr. Rigg and we've got Mr. Simpkins. Okay. Ms. K.
Elegy in a country courtyard.
Okay. So what year is that?
19.
Okay, so 1919. Elegy in a. Okay, so period 1. Casey. Okay. Mr. Blue.
Has 1916 been?
Yes, 1916. Let's see. No, it has not.
Okay, can I do in time of breaking of the breaking of nations?
Okay, so for you, we have blue. Okay, Mr. Heaton.
I'll do Rain by Edward Thomas for 1960.
Got it. So, we got Garrett. Okay, Sam.
Fine, since you're taking all of these, I have a Rendezvous with Death from
Okay.
1917.
Got it. So one, Sam. Okay, Ms. Kenner.
Was 1918.
Yes, 1918 was taken. What we have left is Roundel, I'm sorry, The Second Coming from 1919 and after. And we also have left Anthem for Doomed Youth from 1917. So those are the two left.
Okay, I'll take Anthem Doomed Youth 1917.
Okay, so Malia. Is it Malia or Malia? I always get it wrong. Okay. I got it right then. Okay, Kenny. And that leaves Lee. You got William Butler Yeats, The Second Coming. So, Warren. Okay, your job is this. Tomorrow at the beginning of class, I will give you 5 minutes to do final prep, and then we're going to go through year by year in the chronological order that I have them listed there. So presentations will happen tomorrow, and then on Thursday you will have the worksheet due, and we'll move on with other things. Basically, your job in presentation is to read the poem and explain the poem. Now, you can read it line by line or stanza by stanza and explain it that way. That's probably the way I would do it, the way my brain works. But you also might choose to read the entire poem and then systematically explain it bit by bit. Whatever works for you as an individual or as a team. You have to read and explain both poems. And then what I want is a reaction. What do you think it means about the war? What trends do you see? Things like that. You can find some interesting questions to answer in the worksheet on the last page. And the worksheet deals with overall trends year by year, and then it asks the shifts in topic, tone, and temper over the years and changes and why. So, does anyone not understand what it is you're doing? By their nature, these presentations will probably be from 4 to 10 minutes long, depending upon, and I'm talking about per poem. So each group might expect to spend 8 to 16 or so minutes in front of the class. Since there are no more questions, you've got the rest of the period to prepare, and again, just after beginning of class tomorrow, you're going to start presenting. Thank you. You at home, you know what to do. Study a poem in detail and be ready to think about that and interpret one of the poems yourself. That's what you've got to do at home. You're not going to be able to make a presentation in front of the class, but what you will be able to do is react. Now, I could assign something to you. Oh, yes, I could, but I'm not going to. What I expect you to do is know a poem well, and I expect you to be willing to think intelligently about it, and then listen to all the presentations tomorrow, and then do the worksheet. That's what you got to do. Thank you.